All right, well, welcome. We are live here. Today is Monday, June 22nd, I believe. And we're having our Coach Dave Live with Dr. Laura Anne Bassette out of Ball State University. Very, very excited to have her joining us. More importantly, was even excited years ago when Laura and I first started talking. And because of her experience, expertise in behavior analysis and her background, which she's going to share with you. But I was so intrigued that to connect with Laura and that she is doing research in that field and focusing it on exercise. And it's just, again, I think there's a way to bridge this gap to the special ed administrators and why exercise is so important for this community. And, you know, unfortunately, from my world and many of the other past guests we've had on here is, you know, they're physical education professionals. And we understand the value of exercise. And myself and many physical educators, or adapted physical educators, to this day and for years have been advocating about the importance of exercise. And I feel that, Laura, what you're doing from your perspective and your expertise in ABA and behavior analysis, that I really feel is just so critical, not just for our kids, but even for the professionals in physical or adaptive physical education. If we can spread that message, not only are the kids going to get what they need, but quite frankly, I mean, in many of these schools, you know, PE is being cut, or APE, and it's unfortunate. So, again, thank you for joining us. And with that said, if you can just fill the group in and tell everyone your background and in behavioral analysis and why you started working with those with autism and other disabilities.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. And I can share that I was so excited when I was able to connect with you as well and learn about ExerciseBuddy and the app and everything it has to offer. So I'm so excited to be here to be able to share this information. So I first actually became interested in working with people with disabilities because of my interest in therapeutic horseback riding. So I'd worked as a therapeutic riding instructor. And so I worked with a number of different people with different types of disabilities. And through that, I was exposed to some of the initial principles of applied behavior analysis of ABA, including things like, you know, prompting, developing task analyses, kind of breaking things down, breaking down your instruction through my work with teaching horseback riding. And so I also worked with a number of special education teachers who would bring their students out to the barn that I worked at, and they would bring their classes out as part of their special education programming. And so through that, I became really interested in special education. And so I then pursued my doctoral studies in special education. And during that time, you know, I engaged in a number of practicum experiences, working with different students with disabilities and applying the principles of ABA. And I really saw, you know, and really enjoyed how I could, you know, implement these different principles and see how it impacted the learning of the students that I was working with. You know, I could systematically provide instruction and reinforce their behavior, and then see how they were able to, you know, learn new skills. They were able to acquire things, you know, they were able to exceed expectations in regards to understanding and change their behavior. And so that was, you know, really reinforcing to me to be able to see, you know, somebody learning right there in front of you based on, you know, how you're instructing them. And so I was also really drawn to this whole single case research, which is part of kind of the foundation of ABA, and this idea of, you know, systematically implementing an intervention to help change behavior, and kind of how you can systematically research, you know, what you're doing to get to behavior change. And so I was just really kind of drawn to that through my doctoral studies. And during my doctoral studies, I did no research with physical activity. It was all kind of more academic, life skill type of focus. But I did a lot of work with technology. And so that was when I started to transition into physical activity, I still had this background with technology. And so that was part of what I loved when I came across ExerciseBuddy as well. And so, you know, through these different experiences, you know, I really saw the benefits of ABA. And then So after my doctoral work, I worked as a behavior analyst with adolescents and adults with developmental disabilities. And during that time, I really saw how a lack of mobility, a lack of physical activity impacted their quality of life, kind of their willingness to, go out into the community to do different things. And I was personally at this kind of around that same time going through increasing my own fitness. And so I was personally experiencing the benefits of, engaging more physical activity. And so, all of these factors kind of led me to think about how I can use behavioral principles to help increase fitness, and really thinking about, how we can promote fitness for people with disabilities across the lifespan, was important to me, and thinking about, the adults that I worked with and how it was impacting them. And so when I started at my position at Ball State, this was a interest that I really wanted to pursue. And so, I was thinking about behavior analysis and technology and physical activity and how I can pull all of these together.
Interesting. Okay. So if you're just joining us, again, we're here with Dr. Laura Anne Bassette, and she is discussing how and why she got into not only ABA, but started focusing on exercise and researching exercise and what it can do to impact behavioral change for those with autism or anyone, participating in behavioral therapy. And a lot of that came from the root of that started from her own horseback riding and therapeutic riding as an intervention, correct? That you were, okay, so great. And again, everyone joining us, we will have this posted on our Coach Dave Live YouTube page after this video. So Laura, you kind of talked about it. Like and maybe you can fill us in briefly, but from what I've seen and read in research, I typically see anything related to physical education and research from adapted physical educators or physical educators. But, prior to talking to you, I didn't really hear much about ABA or behavioral analysis research and exercise. So are there other colleagues like yours out there or peers that you know of? I mean, is there a widespread information that you could share with us, or at least know, or are you kind of one of the select few in your domain and your expertise?
Yeah, so I think there's some limited, other researchers out there in regards to using ABA with a focus on physical activity, but I think it certainly is limited. But it's so needed. There's lots of research out there that shows the deficits of physical activity for people with autism. Right? We know that they don't engage in as much physical activity as their typical peers. They're more likely to be overweight and obese, compared to their typical peers. We know, that physical activity has so many benefits, physically and emotionally, mentally for everyone who engages in it. And then even more so for, people with autism. So I think it's, certainly such an important area in thinking about these deficits and, thinking about how we can use these behavioral principles to help increase exercise.
Got it. So, I've spent a lot of time overseas and a lot of time here in the States. And I think I'm seeing two things. I see one here in the States, clearly ABA and behavioral analysis is a critical component to many of these children, right? And then overseas, that's still one of the foundational things, and rightfully so, right? There's so much evidence and so much research to support it. I think the other piece is that it is covered, by insurance. So obviously makes sense, but we also hear in the States now where it's not as accepted, or parents are going to other alternatives and other practices, which I think, not every kid is going to respond the same, and there should be other avenues in a way that we approach to help them with behavior change. But again, getting back to the exercise pieces, how has, given your research and exercise impact, how has this been, what is your response from, one, your colleagues that are at Ball State, but two, even your peers in the ABA field? Like, what is their response to your research, and have they embraced it, or are they just like, what's the response been?
Yeah, I mean, I think given, my research is very applied, right? So I'm out there working directly with my research participants, systematically implementing the intervention, trying to get that behavior change, trying to increase their skill acquisition of the different exercises is really kind of the heart of what I've been doing with my current research. Increase their ability to correctly do, a push-up, for example. And increase how long they can do that for. And so I think, everyone, that I speak with can appreciate the importance of physical activity for people with autism. I know when I've, disseminated my research, at conferences, a lot of times the conferences I go to are practitioner focused. So certainly the practitioners are, they're wanting more information about, how they can use the app, where they can access it, kind of the prompting that's used, how I design those interventions, and what I found to be most effective in regards to the additional components that are needed beyond ExerciseBuddy, to help get to that behavior change and help teach the participants those skills. So, most of the feedback that I've received has been mostly from practitioners and then also the families that I've worked with. I mean, they've, been so excited to have, the parents to have their children get to participate. And the feedback, I've received from them is, at the end of the study, they want, ExerciseBuddy a lot of times. They want to know how they can, continue to use it or have their child use it. And even those who haven't used it, I heard from one parent like 6 months after the study had ended, and she shared how her daughter had, continued to exercise without the app, but she had developed her own system of using pictures and had been able to do it. And so for me, it was just so exciting to hear from the families and from the practitioners about the benefits of the physical activity. In regards to, my peers, some of my publications are just pretty recent, so I haven't been able to see, if they're going to be cited by others who have an interest in this, but I certainly think, when I've gone to conferences and talked with other people, I think there's certainly an interest in it. I think, it's hard to change behavior, right? And physical
Yeah.
activity it's a hard behavior to get folks to engage in. And so I think there's some challenges associated with that. But I think everybody acknowledges and appreciates the importance of it. And so, figuring out a way to make it more accessible to folks, I think is something that I could do better with my research. I have very trained data collectors who know, systematically what they need to do to implement all of these different components to get this behavior change. And so one of the things that I would like to see is, kind of how we can streamline those interventions down so that, it could be more easily accessible to, a number of different practitioners who are, we work one-on-one with our participants. How can you, as a PE teacher, work with an entire class and have it be effective, but still get, really to that behavior change. And I mean, this is the challenge with any behavior, but I think physical activity, and something that may be uncomfortable, when you're getting sweaty or breathing heavy or, your heart
Sure.
rate's up, all of those things, I think makes it a little challenging.
Yeah, and well, it's obviously positive to hear, that, and I appreciate you, mentioning ExerciseBuddy and everything, but I think the bigger picture here is just about exercise in general. But it's really good to hear that not only the parents or the individuals responding to ExerciseBuddy, but even that the stories of like, yeah, those families, like their daughter or their kid was, independently involved in doing things in exercise.
Yeah.
And we've always said that from the beginning, like ExerciseBuddy, for example, is a tool. It's not going to it's not going to solve every child's problem, nor is technology right for every child. But we know that it can help many, and the fact that some kids or adults are learning to do exercise with or without it is awesome. I guess when you talk about behavior change and we talk about your research about going, trying to get them to engage in exercise makes sense. So there's a question coming here, and I guess I'm just thinking this through. So I was working alongside an ABA therapist years ago, and what I did to implement exercise for this student or this client, but child who was pretty on the more severe end of the autism spectrum, nonverbal. She definitely had some behaviors, and she was trying to communicate via like a touch board, actually like rapid prompting method, which I know there's some controversy in that field, but that's how was her communication. So what I did is I then implemented exercise, I saw the routine and the structure that the ABA therapist had, right, in their protocol. And it was pretty much task, reward, task, reward. So what I did is it went like task, reward, task, reward. Then I went exercise, reward, then task, reward, then exercise, reward to work with that structure. But what I was interested in, I guess here's my question is, okay, now that she got a few minutes of exercise, and again, these were the first couple sessions, but, you know, are we going to see potentially, based on the research, other avenues of research, are we going to see that if we can implement an exercise break into a routine, can we see improvements in the behavior of, like she was working on fine motor stuff or even language development? So have you seen anything like that, or is your research doing anything like that where we're adding a few minutes of exercise to see the behavior change in, call it a fine motor skill or language or something like that?
Right, right. Yeah, no, this is a great topic. And this is not something I've personally done with my own research. But I know some of the limited research out there has suggested that, right, by increasing exercise, you know, it does help increase on-task behavior and academic engagement, you know, and reduce, you know, stereotypies and those types of things. And perhaps it gets the learner in a better place to then be able to focus on other academic skills. And so, yeah, I think that is terrific, and it's not something that I've personally done with my research, but certainly I think it's an area that could be explored further, and, you know, really get to see, you know, and I mean, not just kids with autism, probably, you know, kids in general, you know, any kids, to get them, you know, in a good place to be able to learn, you know, and some of the challenges associated with, you know, the time for physical education class, you know, and those cuts that you had mentioned earlier. So
yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, we're seeing this more of these movement breaks for schools and for the kids, and they need it. It's just, again, I know my colleagues and my peers in physical ed or adaptive physical ed are, their hands are in the air. Like, what more could we say? What more research can there be to show the value and what exercise can do, not just in the immediate, but how about in the test results for neurotypical kids, right? They say a more physically active kid is having better, can show to have better test results, right? In standardized testing, but we keep removing it from our schools. I know it's a weird and crazy time, you know, that we're all experiencing, but this was happening years ago, and PE was getting reduced. So me, along with, again, the many colleagues and peers in this exercise community, are just continuously to advocate. And going back to what I said earlier about what you're doing specifically to those with autism, I think you have such a message to share. And that's why I'm so thankful for you to be here, that parents need to know this, and many do, but quite frankly, the IEP teams and the admins, who they've told me exercise is number 12 on our list. Like, they don't think about it, but it's law. It's law.
Right.
It's a mandated law in IDEA that our kids with autism or special needs should be getting physical education. So that's why we're having Dr. Laura Anne Bassette here. If you're just joining us, this is why her message and her research is so powerful. Again, we will post this on on my YouTube channel following. And again, I want to say hello to Carolyn from Minnesota. Thank you for joining us. We've got Ahmad from Malaysia. Thank you for joining us. So we got people all over from the world. So Laura, again, you're making a worldwide impact. So thank you for being here. So another question. So, you know, and one thing that I've learned, or that I've heard, I should say, over the years in ABA is that, you know, spoken with many parents, and again, when I've been overseas, you're seeing it too. But, you know, the main reward, or I should say the complaint that some parents are seeing, is that the reinforcer used primarily is food. And I get it, but there's stuff that says out, you know, there's postings and people say, like, you shouldn't treat our kids like dogs, and, you know, that's how you train a dog, but it's a sensitive topic. But you know, what are your thoughts on this? And do you look at what your research is bringing? Is could maybe we one day turn to exercise as a reward, or you know, what's your thoughts and feedback on, you know, food as the motivator?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think this is such a great question and really important to think about. You know, when we're thinking about ABA, you know, one of the first things that you want to do is to identify something, right, that's motivating to the person, right? We're talking about behavior change. And so we need to think about something that they're, you know, especially if they're, let's say, engaging in a problem behavior and you want to teach them, you know, maybe some sort of language or communication to replace that problem behavior, right? So that they're not, getting aggressive, for example, to get their needs met. So, you know, we need to think about how can we make, you know, the communication, motivating to them over what's already been working for them in regards to maybe our problem behavior. And so a lot of times I think people go to food because it's something that's easily identifiable, right? It serves a biological function. You know, everyone is motivated by food because it reduces hunger, right? I mean, this is a biological need that everybody has. And it's unconditioned, right? So there's no learning history that's needed for someone to know that food is important to their biological functioning. And so I think it can be easily identified, and that's why a lot of people may go to it first. But it's also important, you know, in ABA, you know, one of the things that should be being done is a preference assessment where you're exploring a wide range of different types of things that could be potentially reinforcing, you know, that could be motivating to someone to help get to that behavior change. And so you shouldn't just be, you know, seeing if food is an example. It could be access to other items, you know, like
Sure.
YouTube videos, you know, for
Right.
example, or like you said, exercise, you know, taking a
Right.
break, being left alone, like even the opportunity just to engage in like self-stimulatory behavior, you know, can serve as a reinforcer, taking a break, you
Yeah.
know, all of these things. So I think it's just important for, you know, folks out in the field. And if you're seeing food as the only, you know, item that's being used as the reinforcement, you know, speak with who, you know, your team and whoever you're working with and see if you can identify, you know, potential other reinforcers
Hmm.
to see if they can be used instead. You know, depending on, you know, a lot of times you hear they're not motivated by anything, you know, depending on the severity of the disability.
Sure.
But that's not necessarily the case. And so you need to be, I think, creative in identifying. And then, you know, whenever you have any type of secondary reinforcer, you know, you always want to be thinking about how you can fade that out, you know, how you can increase the target behavior and reduce the contact with the reinforcement.
Yeah.
So that would be the other thing with food.
Yeah, so I think like what you just said is probably good for parents to hear. But yeah, like a preference assessment, because I know when we talk about exercise and in our courses and in our certificate, we're saying ask the parents, right? Like, what is motivating? Is it Tom or Jerry? Is it SpongeBob? Is it Barney or whatever? But if these ABA therapists aren't asking you those things, it may be, look, there's I think everyone in whatever field it is, whether it's autism related or selling you a car, they all have the best intention, but it also doesn't mean that they're they could be better, right? So if they forget about this preference assessment and for years they're just like, I'm just going to give them M&Ms or I'm just going to give them Skittles. Well, mom or dad, there's probably thousands of other ABA therapists in your community that are going to ask you the questions, like Dr. Bassett is saying, is, you know, what does he prefer? Because, yeah, I guess going back and the lastly about food, I remember this was in like 2009. I was at a conference sitting next to Kinnikinnick Foods, and it was one of the first like more gluten free foods that we know many of our kids eat, gluten free foods. But they had like um, they also, not only do they have gluten free foods, but they had like gluten free snacks. Like I remember like an Oreo type cookie, and I looked at the calories, and I was like, man, do the parents ever say anything to you about the calories? They're like, no, they're just happy to get foods that their kids can eat, which makes sense. But you know, going back to exercise now, remember parents, and if you haven't seen, listen to our other shows and our other guests. your kids aren't going to be in the very beginning stages, and I'm sure Laura can back me up on this. They're not going to be burning thousands of calories. We just need to get them moving, right? And so the foods that you are eating, obviously we know we want you to choose the most nutritious foods, but we also know that your kids, many of them are picky eaters. But if we're going into behavioral therapy and adding more calories to them, we have to find other alternatives. So I appreciate you sharing that with everyone, Laura, because I think it's so impactful for parents to hear is, yeah, it's a preference assessment. If they're not asking you those questions, then it may be time to look for someone else, or just bring it up to them. Hey, is there any other thing that we can do to help my kid? Because many of them call me and say, hey, my kid's gaining weight. What do I do?
Right. And I think the same could be spoken to in relation to exercise, right? Is thinking about there's so many different ways that you can engage in exercise, and how can you offer different, opportunities for the learner to identify what might be something they, prefer to do the most in regards to exercise, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I was thinking about myself. I like to do a number of different things versus my husband. He only runs and does weightlifting. I like to do, yoga,
Sure.
weightlifting, cardio, all different types of things. And so I think the more that we can expose, people with autism or other disabilities to all different types of exercises, so that we can start to, have them identify what type they might enjoy, engaging in, can help get them moving and increase their, their preference and their, more inherent, come into contact with that natural reinforcement of the movement itself, and then maybe not rely so much on those, secondary reinforcers.
Yeah. So we've got about 4 more minutes left. I have one more question. And then I don't know, we don't really have any questions that I'm seeing from anyone, but you kind of already touched on a little bit of ExerciseBuddy in your research. So if you could share with us, briefly, what your research has been, what the results have been thus far, maybe where you're going with that. If you can share with everyone.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, when I first learned about the app, I was so excited about it because I had done, the work with technology previously with video modeling, especially. And I just love how the app incorporated the video modeling and the picture cues. And, really just thinking about how these features can be utilized to help focus on skill acquisition with my participants. And so, and this is something that, I've said and that we've talked about is, and you had said, just the technology alone is not necessarily going to be sufficient, especially when thinking about a skill like exercise that needs, to be taught, they need to understand what to do it safely, to do it correctly, to not hurt themselves, because it may be, aversive because of the physical demands associated with it. So, just thinking about, through my research is what I've been trying to identify is how I can use the app with some of the other behavioral principles to get to that behavior change. So, I've done things that involve, researcher prompting, increasing criteria slowly. So they're not expected, to do, hold a plank for a full minute. We start at 10 or 20 seconds, depending on what they're able to do, and then build that up, just like for anybody starting an exercise program. So, thinking about how you can incorporate these additional components, along with the app, I think is what I focus on with my research, and has been really beneficial. But, the app has certainly helped, in regards to helping to increase their independence and being able to learn how to do those skills correctly. I've also, with my research, taught the participants how to create their own workouts within ExerciseBuddy using video modeling. And so, they've been able to do that, pretty easily. And I think that speaks to how the app was created and the efficiency, and their ability to create their own workouts. And then also just the option of viewing those video models, I think has been a really key component to the app. I think just like we talked about fading the reinforcement, right? We could also fade instruction, like the video models, right? So maybe initially they need to watch those to learn how to do it, but then ultimately they know how to do it and they don't need that video model. And so I think that's a great component as well, to help increase their independence.
And when you're doing this research, I mean, we know we have the first end boards built in. We know we have the start finish. What board are you using, or are you seeing the students or your clients using the most? What are you using
Yeah, so
most?
I've used the start finish. That's the only one I've used, and that's because that's where we can incorporate the most number of exercises in
Mm-hmm,
there.
mm-hmm.
And so that's what I've focused on. But I think there's certainly potential to explore the others as well with research. I haven't gotten to those yet,
Got
though.
it.
But yeah.
Yeah, because one of the things I'm just, trying to educate people on is like, as we move into more remote learning and stuff, is we know that those start finish boards, those first then boards are in many ways, these kids are still learning in a special ed classroom, or adults, or when we're trying to introduce a new task like exercise. So we revert back to the ways that they were once learning.
Mhm.
And that's why we've done it. And that's why I think, we believe that people would see success. And now you're validating that along with other researchers. But that's what I continue to tell, APE and the PE world is like, look, we have all these various tools, the technology and video, but we have, we have the foundations of the way they've learned, some of them for 18 years,
Mhm.
to say, here, it's in ExerciseBuddy. You can customize things and to show them, like, but you got to stick with those evidence-based practices that many of them have used across their, at least their school age lifetime.
Right.
So, well, Laura, we're about to wrap up here. So again, I want to thank you. I want to remind everyone that we are going to have this posted on our page, but I want to see, one, if there's any questions. But as I'm looking into questions, if anyone has any, Laura, anything that you want to end with in regards to what you're doing, inspirational messages to your ABA peers, parents, or even the PE world?
Yeah, so well, thank you so much. Hopefully this information was informative to a number of people. Definitely, I hope the parents and practitioners were able to glean some important information from it in regards to what to look for in regards to exercise and trying to promote exercise with the folks that they're working with. I am currently conducting a study using ExerciseBuddy where they're going to be taught the exercises remotely. So if anybody has any interest in learning about that, please contact me. And even if the study is filled, I'm pursuing other funding opportunities, trying to get some more funding for future research. So I'd certainly be interested in hearing from you if you're interested in potentially participating in future research or collaborating with me on future projects as well.
Well, thank you. And yes, I forgot about that. So if you guys do have questions, you can email us and I can get you in contact with Dr. Bassette and to be a part of some of those studies with ExerciseBuddy and with your kids. So that sounds great. Thank you, Laura. Or thank you, Dr. Bassette, again, for joining us. And we will keep everyone posted on Laura's research and everything. But again, thank you again for coming in. Next week, I want to remind everyone, next week, I have a really interesting guest, and his name is Ben Bordeaux, and he is, first and foremost, he's a third-year Ph.D. student in exercise or in kinesiology at the University of Georgia. I met him at a conference. He came up to me, and the reason he approached me is he believed in my message because he's an individual with autism. So I think it's going to be a very powerful message. And just when I spoke with him, I was taken aback. So again, he's coming on and he's going to share some of what exercise really does for him as being an individual diagnosed on the spectrum, but to hear his story of being his third year of a PhD student in kinesiology, I think is just so inspirational, but it's going to be awesome. So I hope you all can join us. Again, Dr. Bassette, thank you for everything that you're doing to help support the community, bring exercise to this community, and I know we'll be in touch. So thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.